We are now officially live. Which means... You guys ready in 30 seconds?
I guess.
So I'm not sure everybody realized, but my fake ad read for the Renaissance Fair a few episodes ago was not real.
Did anyone email you about
Oh, we all knew that.
Yep, not real. There's no such thing.
Like
as...
anyone would ever sponsor this show. I mean,
Yeah, that's the more unbelievable part of the story. It's not the Renaissance ad itself. It's just that anyone would ever sponsor the show.
Okay, all right.
that's
are
exactly
live.
it.
We are live, folks. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast.
Hello!
Episode 203, the podcast that explores work of think tanks across the country. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendall, and joining me today, we have got a full house here. To my left, we've got producer extraordinaire Andy, who still does not have a camera. I don't think he ever will. And then we have got, joining us, we have got Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. How are you doing today, good sir?
On the YouTube version, I look like a Nintendo 64 graphic.
Well, that's good. That's good. That should be.
Can you see?
strive
Can you
for.
see it? Is the quality bad on your end as well?
It looks a little.
Yes, it's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. I look like a
Just
guy
like
in
you.
GoldenEye that's about to get
Just
capped.
like you.
Oh, I got words for you, trash bins, and they're Matt Brennig's words.
All right. Also joining us, we have got Justin Haskins, who is the editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm regretting coming on this show already.
You should.
We're
You're about
only
to get
like-
dressed down, son.
We're only about 30 seconds in, and I already know this was a horrible life choice. So.
And rounding out the little four-square thing we've got going on, we got kind of a Brady Bunch thing going on here. That's pretty cool. We have Big Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing great. So, Donnie, how many weeks in a row is it now that you actually got Justin's title correct?
I think that's 3.
Is it 1 week in a row?
I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I think I've got that 3 weeks in a row now. Maybe you can correct.
Is
me
it
if I'm wrong.
executive trash bag?
It's no, I'm not an executive. I'm a director.
Yes,
You're
correct.
wrong.
Oh, director of
Director.
trash.
Looks like we already lost Jim, so that's a good start. Why don't I just tease the things we're going to talk about? So, we have got a couple of items off the top that we want to get into a little bit. Maybe we'll save one for the end here. But then I think the heart of this episode is going to be responding to Bernie Sanders on the Joe Rogan podcast. So I thought this was an important thing. Andy came up to me earlier in the week, and he's like, oh, hey, did you see that Bernie Sanders is going to be on the Joe Rogan podcast? And he can attest to this. My reaction was, oh, are you serious? I was so disappointed. And not because I don't want his message out there and stuff like that, obviously the theater of ideas and stuff like that, but just because I knew I was going to have to watch it. And if you're not familiar with Joe Rogan podcast episodes, but they tend to be like 2.5, 3 hours long. So I was just like, I'm going to have to listen to 2.5, 3 hours of Bernie Sanders. It's going to be a nightmare. Thankfully, it was only an hour, but we will get into that. And then also, Justin is his policy brief. He's going to talk about that towards the end of the episode. But first I wanted to start off with Jim talking about ICC's 13, but he is not on right now, so we'll wait for that. But also in that kind of realm of energy-related topics, I want to talk about this article that is new. Michael Moore-backed documentary tackles alternative energy. So why would we be talking about a Michael Moore story? It seems a little outside the realm of what this podcast seeks to talk about. But I found this article. I think actually Isaac liked it on Twitter, but it was being shared by Michael Schellenberger, who is a fantastic
From the think
follow.
tank, Environmental Progress, keeping with the theme of the show.
Absolutely, absolutely. He's a great follow on Twitter. I am still pushing to have you on, sir, if you are listening to this, but we'll try to get our ducks in a row soon. But he does a lot of work on nuclear energy and stuff like that, and he shared this article But so it's a documentary that's coming out that is being backed and promoted by filmmaker Michael Moore and directed by one of his longtime collaborators, Jeff Gibbs. Jeff Gibbs was a producer on such Michael Moore films as Bowling for Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11. So their new documentary here is called Planet of the Humans, which, just stopping right there, I think is an awesome title, by the way. Regardless of what the content is, I endorse that title for a documentary. But why are we bringing this up? Because it turns out that when Michael Moore and his folks or whatever went out to gather info and tape and stuff like that for this documentary, it turns out, this is a quote from the director, Gibbs, it turned out that the wake-up call was on our side. It was kind of crushing to discover that the things I believed in weren't real. First of all, and then to discover not only are solar panels and wind turbines not going to save us, but also that there is a whole dark side of corporate money. It dawned on me that these technologies were just another profit center. So Isaac, I mean, I think I saw this because of your reaction to it on Twitter. What was your reaction?
Oh my God, I was giddy. I was so happy because I saw, Michael Moore, renewable energy, probably going to be some dumb thing, hook, line, and sinker, supporting it and talking about why we need to shift to it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And then to see that he's actually started to peel back the fake facade. I guess every facade is fake.
Let me
Behind
check dictionary.com here.
Yeah, do that. And I really thought that this quote was also instructive. We all want to feel good about something like the electric car, but in the back of your head somewhere you thought, yeah, but where's the electricity coming from? And it's like, I don't want to think about that. I'm glad we have electric cars.
Yeah.
So it's just very fun. It's like such a great time to be alive, ladies and gentlemen, because we are finally getting to the point to where everyone is starting to realize how stupid these technologies are, and we're going to be able to take victory laps very soon, I think. And I don't love anything more than I love a victory lap.
Well, answer that question. Where does the energy come from that powers the car? And I say this because I had a conversation with a family member pretty recently, and they were bringing up this idea in Illinois. They're trying to tax everything, but he's like, taxing specifically electric cars.
Yep.
And they asked me what I thought about that. And I said, well, I guess there's probably some logic to it. I mean, they don't pay gas taxes, but they use wear and tear on the roads and stuff. And he's like, yeah, but I mean, they're better for the environment. And I said, well, do you know what powers those cars? So Isaac, enlighten my family member.
Coal and natural gas, primarily. So natural gas is the largest source of electricity fuel generation in the country. Coal is still number 2. Then you got nuclear. So really, when people talk about the fact that, renewables are growing, they're growing from a very small part of our electricity generation to a slightly less small part of our electricity generation. So enjoy your coal-fired power or coal-fired cars, people.
Right.
Mined by children with cobalt in them, mined by children in the Congo.
Right.
Use that with your fair trade coffee.
Virtue signal about that. There's a couple of other lines in here. It says here, I guess this might be commentary from the author of this article, but it says part of the reason why we had to make this independently, Gibbs said he tried for years to get environmental groups on board to help offset the cost of making this documentary, only to be turned down at every door. And I think that is just a highlight of the fact that these environmental groups know that wind and solar are terrible, and that the only reason that they endorse these things is because they're terrible. So I thought that was a really good point.
and the cash machine, right? Because it's all dollar bills, and we've got. It's so funny. He's like, we were further disheartened when in the film he approaches people like Bill McKibben and local Sierra Club leaders, and they just don't want to talk to him. Like, these are supposed to be thought leaders.
Right.
In that side of the argument, and even they're like, no, we don't want to talk to you. So those are the folks who, should be entirely discredited by the time this is all over. But, we know that probably won't happen because Paul Ehrlich still gets work.
I think that this is a great kind of victory for us. I mean, it's basically Michael Moore realized that point one on our top 5 facts that you should know about climate alarmism, which was probably our most popular episode of the podcast. We'll probably link to that in the show notes. But yeah, so he realizes point one of our 5 points, that wind and solar suck.
Yes.
So now we just have to start pushing them towards point 2, which is that climate alarmist solutions won't curb global CO2 emissions. So,
But I think that's part of it, right? Because he's acknowledging that natural gas is really just being used to fill in the gaps in between wind and solar generation. So, like, he's getting that. Unfortunately, from what I've gathered from the write-ups on this film, is he just thinks everybody needs to live in poverty in order to alleviate this problem. So he's still not to the point to where he thinks that humans can be a positive impact on the environment, or at least minimize their negative impact on the environment. He still has this kind of like original sin mentality where, people are bad. And unfortunately, that's the thing that we need to push back against. But that's why I keep continuing to write my Capitalism is Saving the Planet series.
Nice, very nice.
I think that this is really important, because what Isaac is saying here is something that we've been talking about for years and years and years. And it's this idea that the left, logically, when you play all this out, the left logically does not want human beings to be living as human beings live now. That's really what they don't want. I mean, they say that they can replace all of our existing energy with renewable energy and all of this other stuff, but that's not really what they want. When you actually play this out, what the real hardcore environmentalists want is for us to just abandon our existing lifestyles altogether and go and live in huts or something like that. That's what they want, because that would be better for the environment. There's always going to be something better for the environment that involves all of our lives getting worse. The environment would be great if we all just killed ourselves. I mean, then the environment would be perfect. So I mean, that ultimately, seriously, I mean, logically, when you play all of this out, do we really want cheap renewable energy so that we can build all these gigantic cities with no pollution and all of this other stuff? Is that really what we want? No, they don't want that either, because then we'd be building cities up all over the place and tearing down forests and everything. They don't want that either. So the truth is, what they really want is no energy or very little energy.
Low energy.
They want humans to stop reproducing so much, and they want our populations to decline, or at least not increase, and they want us to learn to live in harmony with nature. That's what they want. They don't want us to have cheap energy, regardless of where that cheap energy is coming from. They don't want us to have it. That's the truth.
Jim,
Agree.
You said in an email responding to this, saying like, I think there's less here than meets the eye. So let me see your cynical approach here.
Well, I just don't trust that Michael Moore is coming to our side on this topic. I think that's a little bit crazy, even by accident. I think he's more along the lines of what Justin said, in that you look at the renewable, the rise of renewables, and you want to do actually, let's just back up. I think it's actually extraordinary and a good thing that they intended to produce a certain kind of film, probably celebrating renewables and green energy and all that stuff, and they were intellectually honest and realized, look, this is a bit of a scam here. And what I think they realized, maybe they were disheartened, but they need to rely, you have to have gas-powered power plants to back up the wind and the solar plants. You can't go full renewable. We've talked about this on this show constantly, and so that's known. But I think you're going to end up with a film that still rips us for having to use fossil fuels. It'll be lamenting, like Justin said, that humans are killing the earth.
Hey, Jim, maybe take a step back from the mic. For some reason, it seems very muffled. But I will say, while you get that situated, I wonder if, because I saw this. I think, like I said, Isaac, you kind of brought it to my attention on Twitter, but it was from a Michael Schellenberger tweet. So obviously he's a big advocate of nuclear. Do you think that this is a first step towards the environmentalists actually maybe starting to embrace nuclear power as an option? Isaac, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of has to be. If they're going to actually sit there and claim that climate change is an existential crisis, saying that if we don't do anything, our kids are going to die, X, Y, Z. But then they realize that renewables don't work. You would think that nuclear power would be the next thing, but who knows, right? I mean, they could go to something equally unworkable like wave power or something like that. So,
Yeah,
it's,
probably.
well,
Well,
but like, let's just all put a bicycle in our basement, and when we get home, we'll hop on the bike for 3 or 4 hours, and maybe that'll be enough to charge our phones. It won't be. I ran the numbers actually one time, and it would be totally inadequate. But
Of course you did.
I did.
I believe it. I totally believe it.
I want to see the study on that. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, that sounds.
Let me see if I can find that article.
Yeah, you should.
What I
totally
do,
find it.
what I think at some point we should do is we should definitely have a segment at some point that just talks about the cost of nuclear power and why nuclear power, whether that's economically feasible,
Sure.
why we haven't moved to nuclear power, what the left says about nuclear power, why they're opposed to it. We should dedicate some time specifically to that.
Well,
cause.
like I said, I want Michael Schellenberger on this podcast. So we
I
can
know,
talk about all of
but
those
we
things.
can't wait forever.
We-
Can't wait forever. We
That-
have 12 years left to live.
That is true,
So,
but I can give you a little bit of insight, and I've probably mentioned this time and time again on this podcast, but I can give you some insight in some of the lefties that are against nuclear power. And my favorite quote of all time is from the Sierra Club, right? Sierra Club?
I think so.
Where they were talking about how they were against nuclear power because they think that that would lead to unnecessary economic growth.
Yep.
Yeah. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. Jim, do you sound better, or are we going to kick you off of this podcast?
I don't know. Do I sound better, or are you going to kick me off of this
Oh,
podcast?
you actually sound
It
pretty
sounds
good.
like he's on AM radio. Let's get rid of him.
All right, I will cut you off if it sounds terrible, but the
Okay.
other topic that I want to get to before we get into the response to Bernie Sanders is you are back from the International Conference on Climate Change. How did that go, sir?
It went fantastic. We had it at the Trump International Hotel, which we discovered later made it, I guess, to the government ethically impossible to have anybody from the Trump administration speak at it, which is what we had planned, and we had some people that had agreed to do that. Regardless, it was a fantastic program. Our keynote at lunch was by Tom McClintock. That made national news. He's a climate realist. He's the ranking member on the subcommittee for waters, wildlife, and oceans on the House Resources Committee. So he's a very influential and powerful congressman who has been reading and depending on Heartland's work to inform his opinions for many years, and it was an honor to have him there. We had about 300 people in attendance, so don't believe the lying fake news media that tells you otherwise, that it was not well attended, they say. Baloney. We had a target of 300 attending, and we got 300 attending. And there's actually just one, we had lots of media there as well, national and international media, but we had people from Switzerland. We had NBC News, CBS News, all registered to be there. It was interesting. The NBC News sent a foreign correspondent instead of I guess, their climate reporter.
Oh.
And that's awesome because they haven't been poisoned yet to believe all the hype and to frame everything. Instead, she was there just to get interviews from people, the scientists that we had there, and I think we informed her very well. We'll see what product they come up with.
All right.
But
Well,
there was.
I do have one kind of critical article here, so maybe you can respond to it. I
All
think
right.
this is from the Weather Channel, sir. It says, pretend underdogs inside a climate denier conference at Trump Hotel. And it starts off, it says, I entered Trump International Hotel in Washington last Thursday with a 3-person team to cover the Heartland Institute's 13th International Conference on Climate Change. I left with 2. So what did you do, sir? You got
man, it's
someone
fun.
hostage?
It's
He's
a
gone.
Thunderdome, man. It's Thunderdome at the at three people enter, 2 people leave. No, yeah. So the guy's name is Joe McCarthy at the Weather Channel. He applied for a media credential, and I looked at his work, and it was extremely dismissive and insulting of the scientists on our side of this international debate. But against my better judgment, I went ahead and he convinced me to allow him to come in because he said, look, I just want to listen and, I want to get that other side. And I know it's BS, but, I very, very rarely reject media credentials. They have to really be super duper fake news that are libeling us everywhere. And actually, one of the people that I would have put on my banned list is a guy who runs a blog. His name is John Cook. He helped. He did very shoddy research that helped establish this phony 97% of scientists agree that humans are causing a global climate crisis. He has used his website to slander and libel the Heartland Institute as an institution, the people that work here, the scientists with whom we work as well, in very just unfair ways. So I never would have allowed him in there. So what happens? The Weather Channel guy comes in and he says, hey, I got some people that'll be coming along with me. And I said, yeah, sure, just give me the names. He gave me the names. John Cook was not among them. And I turn around, and there he is, standing there with the Weather Channel people. So he tried to sneak this guy in, who never would have gotten in. And so I was kind of angry about that. So they were actually in a side room. They were talking to Christopher Monckton, who's very, who can sit and talk to reporters for hours. But I saw John Cook there when they were done talking to Christopher Monckton. I said, look, either John Cook leaves or you all leave, because this is not the way it's going to go around here. You were dishonest. You tried to sneak him in. So John Cook left. They made a big production out of it, like I threw him out. It's like, come on, calm down. I let the rest of you all stay. But his coverage of this conference was laughably inaccurate and really insulting. John Cook did not get kicked out because we're afraid of having the 97% guy there. No, the guy is libeled the Heartland Institute and the people we work with, and I'm not going to allow him to do that. You can watch it online like everybody else.
Well, are we just responding to the title? Are we pretend underdogs?
That's actually funny. It's funny because that was the theme in there. So, he says, the Heartland Institute likes to think it's like the plucky underdog, and we're fighting against, the consensus. Look, you can't have it both ways. Either 97% of scientists disagree, and we're the 3%, and we are pushing back against all odds, or we are this well-funded, powerful group that is changing the world and bringing them toward our side. I think it's the latter. But you can't be, you have to pick one if you're a media guy, He did actually talk about how influential the Heartland Institute is. In fact, here it is. He says, jokes aside, Heartland has enormous political influence under this administration, a fact that belies the think tank's underdog veneer. It's like, okay, well, I think we actually are underdogs and powerful. You can be both, I think.
Sure.
That's for sure. But just a couple of other things. I don't want to dominate the podcast with it, but let's see. Yeah, they say, we like to revel in our contrarian image, and that that we are, it calls us, here we go, we are peddlers of untruths. He didn't outline a single untruth. Not one. This thing is about 3,000 words. It would be nice if you could point that out. And then there was the part when I got on stage, I had to do a little soft shoe up there during a transition between a couple events. And I had mentioned that the Heartland Institute had gone to Poland and had met with Solidarity during the last Conference of the Parties, the COP24 in Poland. And they were very eager to work very much more closely with us that day and moving forward. And I said, hey, do you guys know who we are? Some people consider us pretty controversial. And so I just wanted to be in full disclosure to let you know what the Heartland Institute is, since we kind of just met yesterday. Joe McCarthy writes that, do you know who we are? Lakely said to a crowd of a couple hundred, mostly white men in their 60s and 70s, enjoying breakfast under 6 crystal chandeliers. He was recounting a warning he gave to someone looking to get involved with the Heartland Institute. Yeah, just someone. No, Solidarity, you dope. You were there. You saw it. Just his prose describing the room as some kind of grandiose thing. It's hilarious. And then actually the only people, I just 2 other things that are important to point out.
I'll give you
He
one.
doesn't really quote a lot of the scientists. In fact, I don't think he quoted a single scientist, and they were made available to him all day long. He quotes 2 attendees to get their views on things. Some guy named Bill. Thanks, Bill, for attending. I really appreciate it. But why are you interviewing him and putting him in your story? And then another guy named Sam, who was passing out some of his own, research and materials. He's not a scientist. He's a layman. And he puts him there. He puts him forward as if this guy is representative of what was happening there. You can watch all of this and see for yourself. We had of our 16 panel speakers, 12 of them were PhDs. Of our 8 keynote speakers, 4 of them were PhDs. This is a very serious conference. Go to climateconference.heartland.org, and you can see it all for yourself. And don't trust the Weather Channel. This is a bunch of garbage.
Or you can just go to billsblog.com and get his take.
Yeah.
That's right. That's important.
So Jim, I don't want to give out any information that's not supposed to be public yet, but I do hear some rumblings that there's another ICCC planned.
We are planning one. We get back to us in the spring. It's going to be, I think we're looking at a very fun place to be. It is not going to be on the East Coast.
Hawaii.
And it will probably be not that far west. It'll be in the spring, so stay tuned.
All right.
Cabo.
All right, let's move on, gentlemen and Justin. All right, let's go to Bernie Sanders on the Joe Rogan Experience here. So we actually have a couple of clips lined up, so we're gonna try this. Hopefully, we don't have any technical difficulties. I'm looking at you, Mr. Producer, over there. But yeah, like I said, Bernie Sanders on Joe Rogan Experience. I was really dreading this just because I didn't want to have to sit through and take notes on 3 hours. Luckily, it was only an hour long. Gentlemen, did you watch this? I know, Jim, you watched some clips and stuff here. Anybody else other than kind of my notes that I sent around?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, you didn't miss a whole lot. I do want to say that I don't want to be critical of Joe Rogan. Obviously, he doesn't present himself as this hard-hitting investigative podcast host or anything like that. So while I will say that it was a total softball podcast interview, that's expected. Nobody was expecting him to really come at him like, oh, well, the Cato report says, but we'll do that. So basically, it's just a podcast where people get to talk about stuff. He just has a very informal conversation, and he had the other day Mr. Bernie Sanders on. So I took notes, I watched it, so you don't have to, and just wanted to kind of talk about a handful of things that he went through. So a couple of things I will say that it was nice that he didn't have an audience applauding every time he did one of those lines about how healthcare is a human right or something like that, because that makes the debates unbearable to me. But I will say that he tended to whisper into the mic the entire time like this, and it was really off-putting, and I couldn't get past it. So we have 3 clips here. I could have done 15, but I was just I am not going to put my audience through this. So we only have a couple of clips here, but there was a couple of things that he mentioned that were just, I had to have it. So let's play the first one, the mandate TV thing.
You remember Ross Perot?
Yes.
And people used to laugh at Ross Perot because he used to get up there with a chart and all this stuff, and the media made fun of him. But in fact, he tried in his own way to explain his point of view to the American people. And we need serious discussion on serious issues.
Well, he had because he was so rich, he had the ability to buy airtime on network television, which is pretty unprecedented. He just bought a chunk of airtime and then pled his case.
But you know what goes on in other countries? You don't have to buy that time. What the obligation is, if you are a network, you're going to make that time free and available to candidates.
Do you think that that's something that could be viable in America? I mean, could you convince CBS and NBC and ABC to go along with something like that?
No, you couldn't convince them. You'd have to pass legislation to make that happen. You remember Ross Perot?
Yes.
And people used to laugh at Ross Perot because he...
Oh yeah, I don't want to hear that a second time. So
You'd have to force everybody to do exactly what I want to do in order to get the results that I want.
Well, I mean, what decade are we in where we're gonna start talking about mandating airtime for
Who watches broadcast television?
Right. That was one of my points right here. He is reaching more people from being on the Joe Rogan Experience for an hour than he would if he had any type of airtime on CBS. We are way past this being a thing. But I don't know, Jim, mandating TV appearances for presidential candidates, is that something that you can get behind?
No way. God, spare us. It's bad enough watching the debates on TV.
I can
you
barely
earn your
hear
way
you,
on or
sir.
don't.
I can barely hear you, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. You either earn your way onto onto TV or you don't. I mean, giving free airtime to politicians, my God, I would not be able to take it. We can barely take the debates as they're going on right now, and then mandate equal time. I wonder if Bernie thinks that Wayne Messam deserves
Oh, yeah.
equal time on the air as he does.
And that was kind of my next point. It's like right now we're in a situation where we have 25 candidates running, 24 I think candidates running. A couple of them dropped out already, including your candidate, Mike Gravel, Mr. Jim Lakely. So boom, 24 points to you. But anyways, so it's like, and then in the GOP primaries last time around, there was like 16 of those people. So it's like, you know, and then what are we counting third party as well? Like, how many people get this free airtime? It's just such a like antiquated idea, but I just thought it was so funny that it's just like you got Bernie Sanders peddling that. Should I move on to the next one, or Isaac or Justin? You got any words of wisdom on that?
We already have free airtime. It's called the internet. I don't know if Bernie knows about the internet, but we already have that. Like you can go onto YouTube, you know, YouTube, because you can be your own television station and you can say anything you want. So it already exists. And I don't think that too many millennials are going to be tuning in to CBS News at 8:30 and watching, Bernie Sanders talk for an hour with whoever. I mean, somebody else who's also probably 80 years old and nobody cares about. I don't think it makes any sense at all. But most of what Bernie says doesn't make any sense. So at least he's consistent.
Par for the course. Yeah, a couple of okay. So then he went on. He was talking about government-run healthcare. This was kind of a reoccurring thing throughout his presentation. Here was that he kept saying that his ideas are not extreme. So he would talk about this idea of mandating TV airtime for politicians. He'd be like, "This is not an extreme idea. Other countries do this all over the world." And then he was talking.
Hold on, can I wait? Just 1 second, real quick.
Yeah.
Because this is a recurring theme of other countries do this.
Yes.
He talked about that. He says it all the time. I don't care what they do in other countries. And I think that that's probably the most American thing that I've ever said in my entire life. I don't think that people in America care what other people are doing. We don't care. I don't care if that's what they do in Italy or Nepal or some other part of the world. I don't care what they do there. So stop telling me what they do in other countries. I don't care.
Well, like I said, it's definitely a reoccurring thing in this. He says it multiple times, pretty much on every one of these things that he talks about. So
exactly.
The next one, he talks about government-run healthcare, and he says this is not an extreme idea. Countries all over the world do this, and he basically talks about how this idea is held back by the big bad insurance and drug companies, that there's too much money, and that the greed of drug companies is what holds all of this innovation and stuff like that back. But like and obviously, Justin, feel free to respond to this. But the couple of things that I wanted to point out is that a bunch of things, that the solutions that he is proposing, the Medicare for all. That is not a system that is in all of these countries around the world. Most government-run healthcare systems are not highly centralized. They are regionally run. In fact, in Canada, they're like by province, right? So it's not like this big Washington, D.C. top-down type thing. Most of them do have private insurance elements to it. So, his plans, and I think Elizabeth Warren's, would get rid of private insurance pretty much altogether. So, again, that's outside the norm of all of these countries all over the world. And also, you have co-pays and cost sharing and out-of-pocket costs in these countries as well. And sure, they're lower than what they would be here in the United States. But, I found this one thing saying that 15% of the healthcare expenditures in Canada are out-of-pocket costs, right? So this idea that, he mentions in the podcast that, if you in Canada, if you go to the doctor to get a heart transplant or something like that, you walk out, your bill is zero. I don't know specifically for that procedure or something like that, but there are out-of-pocket expenses in these different countries. In fact, PolitiFact stated that his statement on this idea that, it's just completely free to the consumer is half true. So if you put the partisan curve on PolitiFact, that means that it's a complete lie. So Justin, again, you want to respond to any of Bernie Sanders' stuff on healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, Bernie Sanders loves to twist this issue and make it sound like everywhere else in the world where they have any kind of government-run healthcare system, it's exactly like the system that he's calling for, which is, as you pointed out already, completely and
Yeah.
totally not true.
Right.
Also, because we're going to talk a lot about Medicare for All a little bit later, so I won't dive deep into it now, but I will say this. The thing that really bothers me is that the underlying assumption on Medicare for All and really everything Bernie Sanders says and does is that the only way to do it, the only way is to elect somebody like him and a bunch of other people like him in Congress and then to pass it. We have 50 states, and any state in America, any state could at any time give free health care to everybody in that state. Every state has that option. They could do it right now. All they have to do is pass a law and raise taxes themselves, and they could do it. There's a reason why none of them have actually done it. There's a reason for that. It's because it's financially completely infeasible. You can't do it. That's the point.
Yeah, let's
That's
talk
why
about
no one's done
Medicare
it.
for all.
No, we're gonna get to that later.
Okay.
But in Vermont, in his own state,
Yeah,
in Vermont, they did this. They
Yeah.
passed a law saying we're going to give everybody health care. And then they could not figure out a way to fund it. So they've done this. They've tried it. It doesn't ever work. So the idea that we have to have this national health system and that it's the only way to do it is not true. And then the idea that this is that we couldn't do it any other way, even if we tried. Other countries around the world are smaller than many of the states that we have here in the United States, and yet the states here are choosing not to do it. So there's a reason why that's happening. It's because it's a really bad idea financially, and these states have figured that out, and that's why we don't have it.
So then he goes on and he starts talking about minimum wage. And of course, he starts going into his whole spiel about why we need $15 minimum wage. A living wage, I think is what he calls it. Basically, he's one step away from talking about how we don't need the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat. I don't think he actually said those words. But so he talks about minimum wage. And then Joe Rogan, this is like the one time where he did actually kind of push back a little bit. And he said, like, well, you know, I always hear these arguments that say that if you jack up the minimum wage, then what you're really doing is preventing those jobs from getting to like the entry-level jobs, getting to like these teenagers and stuff like that. To which Bernie Sanders said, like, well, it's not all kids. And it's just like, okay, well, yes, that's true. So I looked into the numbers here. Yeah, because he starts going off in examples of how, like, you know, he went to McDonald's and there was a 40-year-old guy or something like that was a cashier. So I got a couple of things here. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is 2017 numbers. It says, although workers under the age of 25 represented about 1/5 of the hourly paid workers, they made up about half of the paid federal minimum wage or less. So half. So Bernie Sanders kind of dismissing this idea as, oh, they're not all kids or whatever. It's like 50%, man. And then Pew Research, it says 45% of the 2.6 million hourly workers who are at or below the federal minimum wage in 2015 were 16 to 24. An additional 23.3% were of the ages of 25 to 34. So this is 2015. Well, basically 68% were under the age of 34. So again, these a lot of this is entry-level jobs, good sir. So then, let's see, what else do I got here? So the one thing is this is also from Pew Research. They talk about how 29 states plus the District of Columbia and nearly 24 cities and counties have their own higher minimum wages than the federal minimum. Obviously, you know, I am generally against minimum wages, but the lower, the smaller the locality and stuff like that, the less bad that this is. There is no reason why somebody living in downtown New York City should be mandated to pay the same minimum wage if somebody that's working in some tiny little rural town in southern Illinois. So that's kind of my point there. And then Cato Institute, for teenagers who comprise a large share of minimum wage workers, studies typically found that a mere 10% increase in the minimum wage resulted in a 1 to 3% decrease in employment. So Bernie Sanders is not advocating for a 10% raise in the minimum wage. He is advocating for a 100% increase in the minimum wage. And then you've got other people that are talking about, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, advocating for $20 minimum wage. And then there was a New York Times article that was advocating for a $33 minimum wage, albeit that was for New York City itself. But yeah, so $15 minimum wage is just the starting point. But yeah, anyone want to talk on minimum wage before I move on to the next point?
Can we
No.
at least mention the fact that Bernie Sanders, up until very recently, was not paying his own employees a $15 minimum wage, and that when he finally did give in and cave, which is just hilarious that he was debating he was fighting with his own, as management, as a socialist presidential candidate, he was the management fighting with his own socialist unionized workers over wages, and that he refused to give them the wages they wanted unless they agreed to reduce their health care benefits, which is just hilarious. And then after he gave in because they leaked it to the press and it would look really bad for them, he threatened them and said, don't leak things to the press. So he's silencing his own union workers.
He's got his own dictatorship going.
Right. Finally he gives in, gives them what they want, and then like literally the same day, Rashida Tlaib, another socialist Democrat, comes out and says, you know what? $15 isn't a living wage anymore. $20 is a minimum wage, is a living wage. And so he's still exploiting his own workers, according to Rashida Tlaib. So I don't know why. I don't know how Joe Rogan, I mean, you can say what you want about Joe Rogan, but I feel like you have to ask that question. Like, if this is a living wage, why weren't you paying your own employees that wage?
Sure.
Yeah, let's invite Joe Rogan onto this podcast and ask him what he was thinking.
I already
Joe
gave
Rogan.
him a pass. I already gave him a pass. He is not.
Yeah, I know, but we didn't. I'm going to write Joe Rogan, and I'm going to say, Dear Mr. Rogan, please be on our podcast.
Here's an honest policy question for you, though. Because Joe Rogan said, like, well, you know, he mentions, well, you know, okay, they're not all teenagers and stuff like that, but a large portion of them are. Would you advocate for, like, different minimum wage per age group? Bernie Sanders said no, but then I was thinking, like, is that even legal? I think that probably treads on, like, ageism law.
I don't know. If they're minors, you might be able to do it if you're talking about minors. I don't know if you can do that though. Yeah, if you're talking about different, you know, a 19-year-old, can you make a law that says that 19-year-olds have to get paid X amount, but 25-year-olds, you know, don't? I mean, I don't know how that would work.
That would get challenged in court for sure.
Yeah, I don't think that's legal.
I don't know either.
Interesting.
Right.
I think that his workers
number 2 ready.
should be able to force their message into his campaign ads. I think they should be required because he thinks that that's a great idea for television. I just think that they should get a say as well.
All right. So
I just want to add quickly. I think what this shows is that, you know.
Turn your mic up, bro. I can barely hear you now. You've got all types of audio issues, Mr. Jim Lakely, and now I think you're frozen. So goodbye, Jim. Have fun setting up the next ICCCC. But in the meantime...
oh, you are the weakest link. Goodbye.
All right, play this next clip. So this is Bernie Sanders talking about cronyism and everything like that.
You got these guys able to stash all over the world trillions of dollars in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda, in Luxembourg, and other tax havens. That is insane, and that has got to end.
Yeah. How is it legal to do that? Why is it legal?
Joe, it is legal because they make the laws.
Right.
All right? You know, you got...
Yeah, so it's legal because
hold on, wait
laws.
a second. Can we just say that it sounds like Bernie is about to die, like at any moment? I mean... He really does.
He's whispering into the mic.
Yeah, he's whispering, and then he's like coughing, like he's got emphysema. It's just really off-putting, for sure.
Wow, Justin, not very classy.
Yeah.
Not
No,
a very
I
classy
admit
thing
it.
to
You're
say.
right. It's
Ageism
not.
over here. Just talking about ageism. But yeah, it's legal because they make the laws, and then he thinks that this is going to get better by putting the government in charge of pretty much every facet of our life. I feel like that's just going to open the door for more cronyism.
Here's the thing, Bernie. They don't make the laws. Lawmakers make the laws. And I know that's really complicated and difficult for a lawmaker to figure out. A guy who's actually in the Senate making laws does not know who makes the laws.
Yeah.
And here's so when he says they make the laws, of course what he means is they are buying off politicians. That's what he means. The problem though is he's a politician and all the people around him are politicians. And so if they're being bought off, and that's the problem, that means they're corrupt. That's what he's admitting. He's saying they're all corrupt. Everyone in Washington's corrupt. That's the problem. If they're all corrupt, why would I want them running everything? But yet that's what he's calling for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like lobbyists are grabbing people in Washington, D.C. and dragging them in a back room like it's a dirty Vegas casino and beating them until they do what they want.
Yeah.
They're voluntarily agreeing to do these things.
Bernie Sanders, you are never going to see your third home again unless you pass this law.
Right.
That's what's going on behind closed doors. So then he starts going into again, like, feel free to stop me and interject or whatever, but he starts talking about how if corporations paid their fair share, we'd be able to pay for all the things that I'm proposing and promising. Then he starts going into the cost of college being too damn high, basically. And I was going to just read off this quote, but I think we have the clip here, Mr. Producer. Clip number 3, please. On the important issue of higher education, here's Bernie Sanders.
All that I'm saying is the world has changed, and a high school degree is not good enough anymore. So expand that concept through college. Now, guess what? 50 years ago, do you know how much the University of California, a very great university, cost in terms of tuition?
How much?
Virtually free.
What's it now?
I don't know, but it's pretty high. It is high. It's thousands of dollars. So you had great universities like the University of California, City University of New York, state colleges all over this country, where tuition was virtually free. And then what happened, for a variety of political reasons, states and the federal government started cutting back on higher education and put more and more burden on the student with higher and higher tuition, which is where we are today.
Yeah, so
Back when I was a kid, I got to eat ice cream and I didn't have to pay anything for it. Today, if I want to eat some Ben & Jerry's, I gotta pay for it.
it's like $5 a pint. I don't know. It's like
what is
$10.
this guy thinking?
How much
was
does that
virtually
cost,
free.
Freddie?
How much does it
don't
cost
know.
today? Well, whoa.
Oh, thousands and thousands of dollars. Yeah, but his
Oh my
explanation
gosh.
of why.
Hold on, wait, one second, real quick.
Of course.
Who is setting the tuition rates? Who's setting the tuition rates in California for the University of California? Is it a bunch of libertarians, a bunch of Republicans?
The corrupt politicians.
It's Democrats. It's a bunch of Democrats just like him. They're the ones setting the tuition rates over there. Don't complain to us. Don't complain to America if you think that college should be free. You know what the tuition is at the University of Vermont in his own state? I don't know. But it's a lot. It's a lot of money.
Thousands of dollars.
Thousands and thousands of dollars. Why isn't it free in Vermont? Again, this is
Well-
just fix the law there then.
I thought it was a pretty uncontroversial kind of thought that the reason why college is expensive is because it's being subsidized so much by the government. I mean, like, if students were unable to pay for this stuff, then the colleges wouldn't be able to raise the price. It's a supply and demand issue. And then we've talked about this again, time and time again, that it's because of government guaranteed loans that has so distorted the market that has been able to allow tuition to just go up and up and up because there's no backstop in the
It's
amount
the housing crisis
demand.
on steroids.
Yeah.
On steroids.
Right. So yeah, for his again, I got this written in quote. For a variety of political reasons, states and federal government started cutting back on higher education and put more and more burden on students with higher and higher tuition. Like, this is the universe that this guy lives in. Like, it's astonishing to me. But let's move on. So then he talks about the how would he pay for this? How would he pay for the student loan bailout? Well, a tax on Wall Street speculation. So he talks about a modest tax on the sale of every stock. Again, this is done in countries all over the world. So, Justin, I know that you have a thought on this, but I just want to mention a tax foundation piece called Taxing Transactions a Few Too Many Times. It basically talks about how, like, these assets are taxed at multiple different levels, and there's basically a pyramiding effect, and it results in just very inefficient taxation scheme. But then the idea that this is done in countries all over the world, well, let's look at Sweden. Sweden's imposition of a financial transaction tax, which is the actual term for it, not Wall Street speculation tax, in the 1980s illustrates the challenges perfectly. The country experienced a 60% decrease in trading volume as it moved to other markets, as well as a decrease in revenue. So this is similar, I guess, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there, Mr. Justin, but It's like a sin tax. If you tax cigarettes or soda or something so much, people just kind of turn to they lower their consumption, and then the tax revenue that you're projected to get from it falls accordingly.
Yeah, it's actually much worse than a sin tax, because in a sin tax, there's a certain percentage of people who are always going to buy that product, no matter how expensive it is. But this whole notion of we want to tax financial transactions because the backstory is there's a lot of people out there who are constantly buying. They're constantly buying lots of stocks. They're buying tons of stocks. And they're using computers as a way to create these multiple financial transactions. And they're purchasing these stocks, sometimes maybe hundreds a day, thousands of transactions a day, something like that. And we want to tax these transactions more in order to fund all these programs. The problem with that is once you start increasing the cost of making those multiple transactions, people are just not going to make them at all. They're going to make financial transactions still, but they're not going to be making thousands. They're going to figure out some other way to make money. They're not going to use this strategy anymore. So unlike a sin tax where you might have some people stop smoking cigarettes because the cost of cigarettes is too high, but a lot of people will still smoke. In this case, you're going to have people who are buying lots and lots and lots they're doing lots of these micro transactions, or they're doing lots of these frequent transactions on Wall Street, are going to just stop doing the practice altogether. Yeah. There's going to be way higher percentage of people who just stop doing it because it won't make financial sense to do it anymore. It's going to be too expensive. So you can't rely on any of the funding that you're supposedly going to get from that.
All right, so I still want to leave some time for you to talk about your Medicare for All thing, so let me just kind of really quickly run through the rest of my responses to Mr. Bernie Sanders. So he talks about the gun show loophole. Obviously, when he's talking about gun violence and stuff like that, he points to the gun show loophole. So just to quickly, there's a lot of information on this from various think tanks. The Cato Institute has a Facts About Gun Shows page that basically shows that this is a largely exaggerated stat. There was a study that they reference here that found that gun shows were such a minor source of criminal gun acquisition that it was not even worth reporting in a separate figure. Additionally, some criminal gun acquisition at gun shows is perpetrated by straw purchasers who are legal gun buyers acting as surrogates for the individual who wants to buy the gun. Straw purchasers have been a federal felony since 1968. So again, it's kind of like these solutions that are being proposed that are actually not going to solve any of the problems. Heartland Institute's published a lot of stuff on this as well, including the Patriot's Guide to Freedom and Firearms, which is actually a chapter of a book that's sitting behind me here, the Patriot's Toolbox. But we won't get into all of that. Then he starts talking about drugs. Obviously, it's Joe Rogan, so he talks about marijuana quite a bit. He asked Bernie Sanders about this. Bernie Sanders' response, which floored me, he says, "Can you believe that there are corporations that are selling these goods that once landed people in jail?" And my answer is yes. Like, alcohol landed people in jail. Like, is it shocking that corporations sell alcohol? But again, we'll move past that. He ended with some climate change stuff. He mentions the fewer than 12 years to deal with climate change. He kind of dismisses solar, or wind, and talks about how solar has great potential, which we've talked about in Manhattan Institute, A New Energy Economy, and Exercise in Magical Thinking, where it talks about solar technologies have improved and will continue to improve, but the era of tenfold gains in efficiency is gone, and that these technologies are already reaching their physical boundaries and stuff like that. But he does acknowledge that he says that we could do everything here. We can stick to all the Paris Climate Accords and all of that stuff, reduce our CO2s down to zero, but everything would be futile if China and India didn't follow along with the agenda. So, kind of pointing back to Michael Moore, who agreed with us on point 1 of our top 5 facts about climate alarmism. That is point 2 of our top 5 facts about climate alarmism. That even if we were to do everything, it all means nothing if China and all that stuff don't follow suit. So we've got Michael Moore agreeing with us on point 1, and we've got Bernie Sanders agreeing with us on point 2. So I think we're making some headway. That's it. That's our response to Bernie Sanders. Justin, let's talk about your Medicare for All. Feel free to set up the context. I don't have any notes on this, so I'll let you take it away.
I've got notes. Let me talk about this. I'll set the table.
Hold on a second.
This was a rough week for me. This was a really rough
Yeah.
week for me, ladies and gentlemen. Cause you know me, I'm all about the unfollow Justin fan club,
We've
right?
got like
I want
7
everyone.
minutes, so speed this up.
Well, fine. Well, we shouldn't have wasted so much time on everything else because this is way more fun to talk about. Anyway, somebody on Twitter ripped apart Justin's Medicare for All analysis. It is Matt Brunig from some socialist website. And he said, the Heartland Institute's Justin Haskins put out a paper purporting to be a distributional analysis of Medicare for All. The paper is one of the shoddiest think tank reports I've ever seen, raising the usual question about conservative think tank output: intentionally deceptive or merely incompetent? I will not answer that question in this post, but I will break down how bad Haskins' paper is.
All right.
And I loved reading that, but I also wanted to protect Justin. So I was very torn, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll let Justin defend himself,
Thank you
because
for-
I feel like I'm on
Yeah.
Team Justin right now, even though I'm typically not on Team Justin.
Thank you for setting the stage, Isaac. Justin, take it away. and you have like 5 minutes. Seriously, we have a hard deadline.
All right, so basically, last week I finally published a paper about Medicare for All that shows pretty clearly, I think, what would happen if we had a Medicare for All plan similar to Bernie Sanders' plan. How would we pay for that? That was the question that I was trying to answer. So Bernie Sanders says we're going to raise taxes on rich people. That's how we're going to pay for it. We're going to have all these savings that are going to come from not having health insurance companies anymore. What I wanted to know is, all right, let's take what Bernie Sanders says at face value. Let's take a look at what Bernie Sanders wants to do. He wants to increase taxes on all of these wealthy people. He has all sorts of ideas for how he's going to do that. But when you add up all of his taxes, it still doesn't come anywhere near close to the cost of what most analysts say it's going to cost to pay for Medicare for All, which is about $32 trillion to $38 trillion over a 10-year period. So what I wanted to know is, how are we going to pay for this? Well, we're probably going to have to raise taxes on everybody, everyone in the country. And this is the same thing that the Mercatus Center study and other studies put forward. They said it's going to basically require doubling people's income taxes. But when you say that to people, they don't necessarily understand what that means. Not everybody pays lots of income taxes. Millions and millions of people don't pay much at all. So how do we decide how this is going to happen? Well, I took a look at what people are paying now in proportion to, based on your income. How much do you pay now in terms of the total percentage of total tax revenue? How much are you responsible for based on your income bracket? And then I said, let's just take the projected cost of Medicare for All and say, all right, you're now responsible for paying for the same percentage that you're paying now of total revenues for Medicare for All. And we came up with this analysis that shows how much we think people are going to end up paying minus business taxes that are going to be applied by Bernie Sanders' plan. And what we found was that it's going to cost a massive amount of money for middle class people as well as wealthy people. For instance, if you are a filer, a tax filer, not just an individual, but you could be a household with joint filer, for instance, and you pay $50,000 or you earn $50,000 to $75,000 a year, you're going to see your tax bill go up $7,000 to $9,000 in our analysis. If you earn $75,000 to $100,000 in a year, you're going to see your tax bill go up by $12,000 to $15,000, and it only gets worse from there. People on average who earn $100,000 or more are going to pay $20,000 or more in additional taxes. This is in addition to all of the business taxes that Bernie Sanders is proposing, or many of them. I excluded some for certain reasons that I explained in the paper. So anyway, Matt Brunig, this left-wing guy that Isaac was just
Spoke
talking
truth
about,
to power.
came out with all of these reasons for why my analysis is totally wrong. And basically what it comes down to is this. He says that if you don't have to pay for healthcare, if states don't have to pay for healthcare, for instance, because the federal government is paying for it, and if employers are not paying for anyone's healthcare anymore, and if individuals are not paying for out-of-pocket expenses anymore, then you need to take these figures and calculate it into taxes, how much individuals are going to pay in additional taxes. And so I didn't do that in certain instances. Some of the complaints that he had were just completely inaccurate. I actually did do some of the things he said I didn't do. But other things that he criticize me for, I think were just completely wrong for him to even come up with that. For instance, he says that I should have taken the total amount in state health programs, $100 billion, he says. I should have taken that. This is what states are paying for some of their healthcare programs. And I should have given that as savings to people on their tax bills, projected tax increases. Even though I have no reason to believe that states are going to cut people's taxes. There's nothing in Medicare for All that says they have to cut their taxes. I'm supposed to automatically assume they're going to get that tax cut.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Illinois has a pretty big budget deficit. So
yeah, exactly. There are a lot of states with budget deficits. There are a lot of states with unfunded pension liabilities. There's no reason to believe that people are going to see those savings.
Yeah.
Employers, it's the same thing. He said, well, employers, you only included some of the savings that employers are going to have, but there's a bunch of other savings. Employers are not going to be paying for anyone's health insurance anymore. So I didn't include enough of those savings. I didn't pass enough of those savings along to individual workers. And the problem with that, though, is how do I know that employers are actually going to pass along those savings to their employees?
I would think the socialists would say that any savings that they get is going to just be put in the rich people's pocket. It's not going to trickle down, right?
Exactly right. I mean, that's what they say about tax cuts all the time. So how do I know that they're actually going to get those savings, number one? And number two, there are a ton of people who are going to get a gigantic tax increase. So if you fall in the $500,000 to $1 million income bracket, for instance, under my analysis, you're going to pay $200,000 more in taxes on average. So aren't those people very likely to get those savings that employers are going to see? They're going to see a lot of those savings. You're not going to say, well, we're going to make Joe over here, who's an executive at the company, pay $200,000 extra every year for healthcare. We're not going to give him any of these savings. Instead, we're going to give it to Bob, who makes $55,000 a year. That doesn't make any sense. His tax bill is only going to go up by maybe $5,000 or something. So you're not going to pass it along to him. So there are a lot of different that's generally, there's a lot of specifics we could go into. We don't have time to go into the specifics, but that's basically his complaint. His complaint was it was really shoddy because I didn't take these savings that are going to happen for states. I didn't take these savings that are going to happen for employers and pass them along to people and then pretend like that's going to be a reduction in their taxes. I should have pretended that they're going to get tax cuts because their employers are going to receive some kind of a benefit and they're going to automatically pass those benefits along, I guess. And the same thing with states. And I just don't think that that's accurate at all. I think it's total garbage. And I think he knows it. And I actually, he and I communicated with each other. We talked about it a little bit. I found the arguments that he made completely and utterly ridiculous. At one point, I said, look, you have an agenda, and I get that, but you could have at least been accurate. In some parts of your analysis, you were totally inaccurate. And he responded by saying, I don't have an agenda. I tried to do a report just like this. I have no agenda. And then I found out later on when I said, hey, are you going to correct some of the factually incorrect things in your article? And he said, because it's been published now by multiple places, including Jacobin magazine, which is a socialist magazine, he said to me, oh, well, I'm sorry, but Jacobin has the right to automatically publish any of the articles that I write. So I'm saying, okay, so you have an exclusive column deal with Jacobin magazine and you're telling me that you don't have some kind of an agenda? You're a socialist. I mean, come on. This is totally ridiculous.
We have to wrap this up, but I do want to say, like, the number that you used at the baseline to calculate how expensive this was going to be, what was that?
I used $32 trillion to $38 trillion. There's two analyses in there. One is $32 trillion, right? Which I think is substantially less than what it will actually cost.
And that's my point. Like, when this is actually in practice, it's going to be significantly more expensive. So that is going to, like, totally, whatever error or anything that there can be perceived to be there would be totally washed out by that. In addition to that, I think we can all agree that even if Bernie Sanders has ways of paying for this stuff, it's going to be debt financed. So that's kind of the other thing.
Absolutely.
This is like a theoretical look at what
he came out with a paper that said, here's how we can pay for Medicare for all. Here are a bunch of options. And if you add up all the money, it's half of what the low end of the cost projection is going to be. So he himself is acknowledging he doesn't know how they're going to pay for it.
All right.
You just vaporized $1.4 trillion, and then that's how you made your paper make sense, Justin.
It's totally ridiculous. Yeah,
All right.
Totally ridiculous.
Gentlemen, we got to wrap it up. Thank you all for tuning in, audience. Everything we talk about will be in the show notes, obviously. If you like our show, please tune in every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank Podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. You could also find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube. If you're an audio-only listener, you're missing out on seeing our beautiful faces, so check us out on YouTube. If you want to follow us, you can on Twitter at In The Tank Pod. If you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, jokes, anecdotes, whatever you want, email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
Justin Haskins is fakenews.com.
And Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Askins on Facebook and Twitter.
Look for that beautiful blue check mark. I'm already
That's
buying
right.
in. Jim, where can the fine people find you? Good talk. All right, thank you all for tuning in. Talk to you next week.